Welcome. My name is Jess Verdi, and I'm a senior editor at Crooked Lane Books. And I'm here today with J.H. Markert. J.H. Markert is a producer, writer, a screenwriter, husband, and father of two from Louisville, Kentucky, where he was also a tennis pro for 25 years before hanging up the rackets for good in 2020. He graduated with a degree in history from the University of Louisville in 1997 and has been writing ever since. His previous novels include The Nightmare Man, Mr. Lullaby, Sleep Tight, and the upcoming Spider to the Fly, coming soon from Crooked Lane Books. Hi, JH.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm still trying to get used to being called JH.
Would you prefer I call you by your first name?
You can call me James or
All right, cool.
H. The H actually stands for Harold, which is my middle name,
James
which
Harold.
most people don't know. But you
James
can call me
Harold in the
anything
purple
you
heart.
want.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks, James. It's good to see you, and
Sure.
congratulations on the upcoming release of Spider to the Fly, which will be in stores on September 2nd, 2025. Can you tell us a little bit about what the book is about?
Um, the book is about the main character, Ellie Isles. One day, her daughter sees the news about a serial killer's latest victim, and she points it out to her mother that and the face she sees on the TV looks exactly like her own. Um, so she goes to the town and starts investigating, and she's fully convinced that she's this victim's twin, and never finds out if she is or not. So she decides to write the true crime book about these murders, these spider murders, and becomes an expert on them. And then fast forward 4 or 5 years, and the murders are still happening. She's kind of become involved with the task force because she started her own what she calls a spider web, which is basically her own true crime online database. And she ends up has identified many of the Jane Does from these murders. Um, but there's something happens with the latest murder that connects her therapist to the situation, and from there it just rolls on with one twist after the next.
Sounds great. I'm not James's editor at Crooked Lane. My colleague Sarah Henry is, but so I haven't read the book yet, but I'm very excited. It sounds really awesome. Um,
I didn't
so
give away any spoilers, so that's
yeah. No, but now I'm like especially intrigued. Um, so tell me a little bit about the like why you decided to write a story about these potential twins or doppelgangers, or what have you ever, always had a fascination with twins, or where did this inspiration come from?
I have always had a fascination with twins, and I don't really know why. I just think it's fascinating that two people can look exactly the same with the same DNA, and just that alone inspired the story. And I wanted to think, what if she finds out she has a twin, and then diving into all the DNA and genetics, and um, that's what this one does. But it also goes into a lot about adoption and foster care and that type of thing.
Oh, that is definitely up my alley. I'm as an adoptive parent, I'm always thinking about these big questions of like
Hmm.
nature versus nurture.
Yes, and that honestly, that when you get down to the core of this book, it's about nature versus nurture.
What was the research like? Did you have to dig into medical stuff, DNA, that kind of thing?
I did. I didn't dive in as deep on research as I would with my historical novels,
Mhm.
um, but part of it was because I've never had a book where I signed a contract and I had to write it as quickly as this one to get it to production. So I
Yay,
did as
publishing.
yeah, I did as much research as I could. I honestly think I signed the contract last June, started on it in July, and then turned it into Sarah by November, something like that.
Mm,
But I did
wow,
I
that
did
was
as so it was more of a not much research before I started, a lot of
Mhm.
research as I went.
Ah, that makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, where do your ideas come from for this book or just in general? Do you have particular inspiration for your horror novels?
Um, a lot of times, for whatever reason, I'll think of an idea while I'm writing one, or the research for one will lead to the idea of another.
Mhm.
Um, or I don't know. Sometimes they just, you observe life and you
Yeah.
read and you look around and ideas pop in your head.
Yeah.
Um, I took a walk the other day around my neighborhood. You know, I was doing edits on my next book, Dig, just to get out. And I thought of a new idea while I was walking. So they come from anywhere. And
That's
honestly,
cool.
for my next book, Dig, I just saw a dinosaur fossil on TV, and that's where the inspiration for that book came from. So,
Ooh, I'm
it,
fascinated.
yeah, as long as your mind is open and you're observing, I think ideas can come from anywhere.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. My writer friends and I call the new idea the shiny new toy
Hmm.
because as you're deep in the trenches of one particular project and editing and might be at the midway point where maybe you don't know what's going to happen next and it
Right.
feels like the work part of writing and then you get
Hmm.
this other idea for this
Yeah.
other book and that's the shiny new toy. That's the exciting one that you only want to think about because it's more fun. The fresh ideas are the fun
And
part.
that's difficult. It's
Yeah.
hard, because you're fully entrenched in writing what you're writing, and then I like that idea. And
Yes.
then you send them all to your agent, and then eventually she blocks you. No, my agent Alice is awesome. She wouldn't do that.
Cool, cool, cool. Hi, Alice. Okay, so I was wondering your perspective on the horror fiction genre in general. It's definitely seeing an increase in readership and popularity. These past couple years, it seems to be one of the fastest growing genres.
Hmm.
For people of across all demographics, women, all different types of people. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that and why that might be.
I actually wrote an article for Crime Reads magazine on this, and I honestly think, um, at least I put myself into this category, that I was such a Stephen King fan growing
Mhm.
up, in the 80s and 90s, um, and I think that generation, there's a lot of Stephen King fans out there, and not just Stephen King, but Dean Koontz,
Mhm.
um, and now we're all starting to write and publish, and have been for maybe a decade or more, and I think that's where a lot of it's coming. I also think stuff like that kind of ebbs and flows, and we're definitely in a golden era, I think,
Yeah,
right now. There's so many good horror writers, um, and I guess I can maybe consider myself in the category.
definitely
I,
can. Yes,
I didn't,
confidently.
and what the funny thing is, what I didn't chase a trend. Um,
Mm,
I spent, my first six novels were all historical fiction, and then I was not under contract for a book, and I decided to write something totally different, which was The Nightmare Man. And I didn't even know if that, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was horror. I didn't know if it was a crime thriller. So I just wrote it. That was the story. Um, and then been writing scarier stuff ever since. I don't think all my stuff is horror. My last two may be more psychological suspense
mhm.
with horror elements. Um,
Yeah.
but I, and sometimes it gets me into trouble, but I think of a story and I write it, and I don't really think about where it might fall.
hmm I think that's a really good strategy. For I've been working in publishing a long time, both as an editor and as an author on both sides of things. And I think we can all, as readers or editors or whomever, we can all feel when an author is chasing a trend as opposed
Hmm.
to writing what comes naturally or what feels exciting or unique to their
Right.
voice. So yeah, I think that's really, really always smart advice is just to write what you want to write and what you feel you can do well or what story you particularly need to share with the world and don't worry about the
Hmm.
rest. Where it
Right.
falls in the bookstore is someone else's problem.
That's a whole nother worry that's out of my control.
Yes.
I
Which,
say control my controllables.
yeah, as an author and a successful one at that, how do you feel about the level of control versus not control you have as an author working with a traditional publisher, like as far as titles and cover art or what have you. Do you find it's helpful to have a team advising you along the way, or do you get a little control-y? Because people have all different kinds of experiences with this.
Um, I like to have a little bit of control, but I also know that from every part of the process, there's someone working who knows it better than I do.
Yeah.
Um, so if there's any control involved, I like that to be more of the book itself, the words, the story. But then again, I'm always open to, you know, Sarah knock me on the head and tell me this is not working, and I'm always open to it.
Yeah.
Uh, I
She's great.
rarely, well, I'll push back a little, but not very hard.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think Spiders to the Flower would be my 11th novel.
Wow.
And I think maybe the second or third total that I've gotten to keep the title that I've
Ah,
on there.
okay. That's a good
So
one. I
yeah,
love
so that
titles.
thank you. That I was really hoping that stayed because
Yeah.
honestly I didn't have any other good ones. um, so I mean that, and I tell you what, the covers so far at Crooked Lane have just been fantastic.
Yeah.
Really good. So you know, the you are the experts at all of what you do, and I'll keep trying to be expertish at what I
Yes,
do.
you are
Is
definitely
that
an
even a
expert.
word? You're an editor. Is that a word? I don't
It
know.
is now. We
Okay,
control
good.
our own destiny, James. It's a
That's
word.
right. It wouldn't be the first time I made a word up.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and you mentioned that some of your titles are more horror leaning and some are more psychological thriller or crime. Um, I find one of the things I find really fascinating about the horror genre in fiction right now is that there are so many different types of stories.
Hmm.
Um, Going from the gory body horror, really descriptive stuff to the more psychological and the more the thriller elements are in the story, but really the scares are in the mind, you know.
Right.
Um, I find that so interesting. So, do you when you're writing or coming up with a story, do you feel like you want to lean one way or the other, or does it just kind of happen naturally?
It just happens naturally, and I think it comes down to a little bit. Uh, I might get shunned for this in the horror world, but I don't watch horror movies. I mean, maybe I like the more thriller, suspense, dark
Yeah. Hmm.
type, but I watch some horror, but I don't watch a lot of horror movies. So I don't have a lot of gore in
Hmm.
my books. There's some, obviously, but I try to have it more um, psychological suspense, more
Yeah.
thought, more character driven,
Hmm.
and gore if it's necessary.
Sure.
Um, but not, I don't throw it in there just to see how gross I can make a scene. If that
Yeah.
makes sense. But you
That's
know,
yeah, that's my favorite kind of horror too, is
and
like
I think too
necessary
the
gore, but nothing gratuitous.
right, exactly.
Hmm.
And I think what's scary is different for different people.
Yeah.
I remember getting on one day on the Nightmare Man, I got three emails. One said, "This is the scariest book I've ever read." The next email said, "I loved this book, but it wasn't scary at all." And then I got a third email that said, "You're trash." And I was thinking, why couldn't I gotten that one first and then the other two?
Well, yeah, I mean that's I guess hey, that's the magic of storytelling. Everyone's gonna
Yes,
take something different away from the stories that are being
yes. And especially today, they'll let you know what they
they sure will.
think.
Yes. By any means necessary. They will
Yeah,
track you down to find you and tell you.
yeah.
Um, okay, well, to wrap up, thank you so much for having this chat. It's been great, and I love getting to talk to you about where your ideas come from and your process, and we're just so thrilled to have you as a Crooked Lane author. And I know librarians around the country, who might be watching this right now, are such big supporters of yours. So I want to thank all
Yes,
of
they are.
yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
been
Thank
amazing.
you, libraries.
Yes, thank you, librarians and libraries.
Yes.
Um, So thank you, James. And once again, this is Spider to the Fly by J.H. Markert, author of Sleep Tight, coming to bookstores and libraries on September 2nd. Thanks
I'm
so
so
much.
excited. Thank you
Yay,
all.
me too. Go team.
That's
All right.
right.
Take care.
All right, bye.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be speaking with the brilliant Leila Siddiqui today about her horror debut, The Glowing Hours, which comes out early next year with Soho Press and Hell's 100, our new horror imprint. Leila, it's so lovely to be speaking with you today. Why don't you start by just introducing yourself and your project, sort of in your own words?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Leila Siddiqui. As Nick said, this is my adult horror debut. I have a previously published novel, House of Glass Hearts, that is YA historical horror. So clearly that is my thing. And The Glowing Hours is primarily about the summer that Mary and Percy Shelley spent in Geneva with Lord Byron and his personal physician, John Polidori. But it's also written from the perspective of the Shelleys' Indian maid, Marinissa. And as a horror-loving gal, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was a huge gateway into that world, especially reading it as a young person, and especially all the lore around it, that she had been away with her lover, staying in a villa in Geneva, and a nightmare is what gave spark to that story. I felt like I wanted to do something with that origin story and how the horrors of the world around us may inspire what we write. What if the villa was actually haunted and not just by the ghosts of what used to reside there, but our own demons? Mary Shelley was only 15 when she first met Percy Shelley. He was already married and he convinced her to run away together. It was not a happily ever after. She spent a lot of that time alone because Percy was always in debt and he'd go into hiding to dodge the creditors. And then her first child ended in a miscarriage. Sorry, that's not true. Her first child passed away soon after being born, and that definitely created strain on their relationship. So Percy just wasn't there for her, and this happily ever after that she as a child had wanted just didn't come true. So then we get to the summer of 1816. Mary is carrying all of this with her and bringing it with her into this villa. So what sort of hauntings will that produce? I wanted to explore that.
Yeah, and it's just fantastic the way you weave in all of these interpersonal relationships, many of which I didn't know about and many readers won't know about and will be fascinated to learn. I mean, really, like, just to accentuate the point, what the book does is return to one of the most, if not the most famous literary creation myths of our canon. It's foreboding summer 1816. A volcanic eruption in Indonesia sends ash throughout the continent of Europe, sort of shrouding Europe in this awful, dreary, dark summer. And the lore goes that they're sitting around the fire in the villa, and Lord Byron goes, "Let us each write a ghost story." And that sort of prompts Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein, which changed history. So, what is it about these people and this story or this lore that first interested you? And why did you feel like you wanted to play with it or intervene on it in the glowing hours?
So the way you set it up, I mean, it's perfect. There's been so much horror fiction already written about the summer, and it is such a perfect setting, right? They stay up all night telling ghost stories, and then a horrific nightmare is what, sparks this idea. And you're also in this giant villa the whole time. I mean, how gothic is that? And these literary figures, they're larger than life. I was already a huge fan of Mary Shelley growing up, and as a teen, I was obsessed with Lord Byron. I mean, of course, he was this brooding bad boy and basically a rock star before the concept of going viral even existed. So for a teen girl, he was definitely my type. And so I wanted to explore who these people are and their histories from a different point of view. I feel like history is so expansive and it's not limited to just one location. So what else was going on in the world in the early 1800s when they were getting together and telling ghost stories? So that was when the British were starting to assert economic dominance in India, which later would open the doors to colonialism. And so how would that have impacted the Shelleys and Byron? So wanting to center the story on my biracial protagonist, Marinissa, and viewing this origin story of Frankenstein from her point of view gave us some context just beyond, Regency era England. It also showed how an outside perspective might view this collection of poets and writers, the genius of Mary and Percy Shelley, the mad, bad, and dangerous to know Lord Byron, and John Polidori, versus the way that we view them now.
Yeah. And I want to get to Marinisa in just a second, but I want to make a bold claim first, which is that in many ways, this book would not exist without the New York Public Library. Because I happen to know you spent hours and hours in the archives researching firsthand accounts, these letters and journals, and taking note of what was there and maybe also what wasn't there, and digging into lesser known features of this story we all think we know. So I just want to allow you for a second to wax poetic about your time in the archive. Like, what was the archive? What did you do while you were there? And how did that information and that research kind of go into the creation of this horror novel?
I'm so incredibly indebted to the New York Public Library. As I researched, I would take time off work because research is work in and of itself, and I'd spend hours in the Schaumburg branch. They have those long, quiet rooms for reading, and they're quiet for a reason because tourists come in and take pictures of how beautiful it is. But it is for people who want to quietly research and work. And that branch has the Pforzheimer collection of Shelley and his contemporaries. And so it has all these writings and memoirs of all the important romantic poets and writers and figures of that time. Of course, John Polidori's memoir is in there too. A lot of these writings are no longer in print. And so I would essentially go to the library, check them out, and I would read them on site because you have to give it back. You can't take it with you. And so I had my favorite area, my favorite seat. So I'd get comfy and I'd dive into the research. And I just have to say, it was such an invaluable resource, and it really allowed me to get into the mind of these historical figures. And curiously, when I read the journals of the Shelleys and of John Polidori, they seemed to just glaze over that summer and the time they spent in the villa. And I remember just going through these books and these writings and just trying to find just a glimpse of what happened, because everything we know is now, after the fact. And then I later learned that Mary Shelley's daughter-in-law took liberties in censoring parts of the journals to protect Mary Shelley's legacy before those journals were then published as travel writings. So that definitely sparked my curiosity. And then unfortunately, one thing that would have been incredible to have in the Pforzheimer collection, which they really can't have, is Lord Byron's memoir, which he did write. And after his death, it was sent to his publisher, and the publisher read it and said no, and just threw it into the fire, which is such a it was just too salacious to go into print. And I really mourn that loss because that would have been a very, very fascinating look into his dynamic with the Shelleys, and also he probably would have gone more into detail about what exactly went on in that villa.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite books that gives me chills to hear you talk about it is how you take archival absence as like a site of opportunity, right? There are these things we don't know about this specific time and this specific summer, and that's a site of just literary opportunity and creation. And one of my favorite things I learned is John Polidori, who, like, for all intents and purposes, is kind of absent from this story. He actually published the first vampire story. So there's just so many cool things to learn from this book. But I want to talk about Meher Begum, your protagonist, who is, when we meet her, she is um, traveling on a ship from Lucknow, India to London. And it's shortly following her mother's death. And she is tasked by her uncle to deliver her brother his letter of inheritance after her mother's loss. So you can imagine she's not very happy to be making this journey, and she comes into London hot and spiteful, and immediately the weather and the atmosphere is like factors into the book. Like mist from the Atlantic Ocean hits her cheek and it stings her. So talk to me about this brilliant character you have and how you conceived of her and how she plays into the story with all these literary figures.
Yeah, so there's a very, without any spoilers, there's a very deliberate reason that she has to get on that ship and she has to deliver that letter of inheritance. But when you read it, then you know why. So years and years ago, before this was even an idea, I read a book by William Dalrymple called The White Mughals, which already was very fascinating to me. And it's the true story of a British soldier who in quotes, marries a noblewoman. She was actually a child in her mid-teens. And like what many British men did at the dawn of British colonialization, is that they would go over to India to make their fortunes. They would get into these families, marry their daughters. They'd take their fortunes, sometimes their children, and leave. And they'd just leave them and they'd abandon them. So that's where Marinissa comes in. She's a product of that kind of union. And there's also the character of Safi in Frankenstein, and I was really fascinated that and struck with this character that Mary Shelley created, that Frankenstein's creation is enamored of. She's an Arab woman, and I often wondered why Mary Shelley made that choice and what inspired her to have this character exist in her story. She's this beautiful outsider with this tragic story, and she gets accepted into this family. And so they all become this perfect family unit, which Frankenstein's creation wants for himself. And so I thought, with such a powerful portrayal of a character so clearly out of ethnic and social world of Mary's, who or what could have inspired her to write such a character? And so in my fictional world, Marinissa is the one.
Yeah, it's so cool to me how you not just juxtapose, but braid these histories together and really use your fiction to talk about South Asian history and culture and all of these facts that were present at this time, but not often talked about in historical record. I just want to talk about the horror element of the book as well, because this is a horror novel and it's a brilliant Gothic horror novel. Why horror? Like, why are all these tropes of the haunted house and foreboding weather and climate and suffocation and why were these so fun for you to write about, and what draws you to horror?
Well, so I feel like Gothic fiction, I feel like it's feminist fiction. It's usually centered around a woman, isolation, the idea of madness, and things like that. Weather definitely plays a huge part in it. I'm a weather junkie. I love following hurricane and snowstorm forecasts. So naturally, I'm from Texas, like tornadoes and hailstorms and all of that. So that was naturally going to play a part in this. But also, homes back then were really dark. And we take that for granted. We could just turn the light on with a switch. But imagine you're in this large house. All you have is a candle to guide your way. And imagine that foreboding feeling that the sun is about to set. And so in moments, you're going to be plunged into darkness. And I loved playing with that contrast between light and dark and how the shadows can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're trapped in a villa with this raging storm outside.
Yeah. And here's my last question for you. What are some of your big horror influences that went into writing the book, or obsessions or fascinations? And to end on, what are some recommendations you have for us if for people who are watching this who want to get more into horror or, what have you?
Of course, yeah. I mean, Toni Morrison's Beloved, not just as a Gothic novel, but as a novel in general, and all the layers within is a huge inspiration. I also devoured Sylvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic. And I thought, let me take a stab at writing my own Gothic novel. I love reading horror from BIPOC authors. I've read almost everything that Stephen Graham Jones has written, and the way history, personal identity, and horror can so effectively be combined. So I hope those are recommendations, but I also recently watched Ryan Coogler's film Sinners, which
Oh, so good.
I'm obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with the movie, the soundtrack, and he weaves in history and horror and music, which is just so many layers of genius that I would really want to aspire to.
Yeah, I have to say I recently saw it and was thinking about you during it for doing sort of similar thing, and it's such a fantastic movie. I think that's our time, but I just want to plug your book one more time, The Glowing Hours by Leila Siddiqui. It comes out early next year. I'm so excited, Leila, for the world to see your book, and so just honored to work with you. And
Thank
it was
you.
fun talking with you.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jess Verdi, a senior editor at Crooked Lane Books. Crooked Lane Books is a imprint that publishes mysteries, thrillers, crime, suspense, and horror novels. And I'm here today with debut author Peter Roche, author of the upcoming novel What the Dead Can Do, which will hit stores and libraries in August of 2025. So just a few months away. Here's the book. This is a galley. And hi, Peter. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jess. It is so wonderful to see you
It's
today.
always so wonderful to see you too. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's get to it.
All right, cool. So I'll just introduce you. Peter Roche is the author of multiple dark fictions, born from the various addictions he chased while living in New York City as an award-winning writer and creative director. He's many years sober now, but remains an addict's addict. What the Dead Can Do is his debut novel. So you're the author of multiple dark fictions, but historically novellas and short stories. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And here's your first novel. So
First novel.
yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what The Dead Can Do is about?
Well, I'm starting to kind of frame it in different ways because
Okay.
I'm starting to talk about it, and
We're
that's a lot of
getting
fun.
to that time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's going to be that time, and I don't know that it's the right way to start, but I do find that it's resonating with people. Is that when my son was 2, he's 10 now, but when he was 2 years old, I became unreasonably obsessed that I was going to die. It was an idea that entered my head and would not go away. I was trying to quit smoking at the time, and I did manage to do that, by the way. Highly recommend it. However, once the idea was in my head, I just couldn't let go. And I got so concerned about it that I started to write him love letters. I sat and wanted to tell him how I felt about certain things that were going on. And I mean, honestly, things were pretty different back then. Like a lot has changed even since. But, and I don't know, somewhere along the way, I had an idea for a story that kind of came out of that and fused it together. But I had never sat down to write this novel when I started those letters. And, of course, I lived. I'm here, which is
good.
good.
We're very glad.
And
Knock
so,
on wood.
yeah, he trips as he leaves.
Oh, God.
But yeah, and so the story itself is actually about a family not unlike my own. It's a family of 3. They have a young son named Ethan, who's 2. They're taking their first vacation as a family to Hawaii, and the plane crashes over Nevada, and everyone dies in the plane crash except for Ethan. And he is left to be taken care of by family friends Matthew and Nicole, and they have an 11-year-old daughter named Emily. And this was all put together, legally, just in case type of stuff. But in the afterlife that I've created for the book, you're able to view what's going on in the living world. And Amanda and Tag, who are the parents of Ethan, see that Matthew and Nicole are not exactly who they thought they were. It's not exactly great in their household, and they're already grieving, of course, because they've left their son behind. And then that grief doubles, triples, quadruples because they're seeing what's happening in and around, with and around their son. And Tag has an idea of what he's going to do with his grief, and Amanda has a very different idea, which is, to put it bluntly, kill her 2-year-old and bring him to the afterlife to reunite them. Pretty dark.
Yes. When I was pitching, if I hadn't mentioned, I'm Peter's editor at Crooked Lane. And when I was pitching this project to my team last year, it was like the consensus was that like this is the most compelling villain we maybe have ever seen. It's a mother who, for the love of her child in her own twisted brain, is trying to kill him for his, in her mind, ultimate well-being, so she could be with him and they can be together in the afterlife. And that is just a very unique take, Peter. So well done.
Thank you know. And I mean, so far so good, because I just saw a review on NetGalley where it was like I wasn't even really sure who to root for, kind of rooting for everyone towards the end. I mean, it's complex, because I think as a parent, even if you're not a parent, but I think these are emotions that are easy to relate to, you know, especially as we see the world kind of start new fires, and the fires that existed getting out of control. I think sometimes people are sitting and wondering, if I could provide something better, would I, even if that meant a lot of sacrifice, and in this case, really sacrificing your son's life because you believe that he would be better off with you in the afterlife. I mean, I've thought about it, Jess,
I know you have.
but as I said, still alive, still alive.
Good. And of course, the foil to Amanda is Tag, who is Ethan's dad, who is equally as dead and misses his son equally as much, but has his son's well-being at his, at heart, first and foremost. So it's an interesting dynamic between the parents. Can we talk a little bit, because you were just like, it's so complex, and it really is such a complex, but such a relatable story. There are so many of us who are parents of young children and have had these same moments like you have, where you fear that of the fear of dying prematurely and leaving them behind, and what that would look like for everyone. And like that's one of the like most deep fears that so many of us who are parents have. But so there are so many relatable elements in this story, including characters who struggle with addiction, characters who struggle with compulsive dark thoughts, characters who are ultimately, inclined to think the best and look on the bright side. And so tell us a little bit about the cast of characters in What the Dead Can Do.
Well, it is all that what you just described for sure. And I think for as long as I can remember, I'm sure this is true of many writers, if not all of them. I find personalities to be fantastic, and I love all the different ways that people walk through the world, and I don't subscribe to any idea that there's a right way. I'm not much of a cynic myself. I don't like cynicism, but I would be lying if I didn't say I dwelled in cynicism for probably a good decade, even though, although people used to say you're the most optimistic cynic I've ever met, if that's a thing. In this case, I think I saw Allie Wilkes talk actually recently, and she was saying it took her a good long while after the book was out to see actually which character was her, right?
Ooh,
What of a character was actually of what of her was actually in a character.
yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And it just sort of timed that I was handed back the book to read for the umpteenth time by you and your team, and had
You're
been away.
welcome.
Thank
Nothing
you.
better than making an author read their own work 100 times and find everything
Hey,
you suddenly hate
not,
about it.
yeah. I don't want to read it again, please. Not anytime soon. It's a lot. Uh, but yeah, and so I thought that was really interesting, the timing of having seen her and then reading that. I started to identify what pieces. There is no one character in my book who is me, but certainly I could sort of see that. And I think in a lot of cases, I'm bringing to the table the different, I'm 52 years old. I've lived as an adult for 3 decades. It feels honestly like you could break it down into even more than 3 decades, in terms of who I've been, what I was doing. I was an addict and an alcoholic for a good chunk of my adulthood. So that's certainly in there. I think within Tag, if somebody were to ask me, "Are you Tag?" I'd be like, "No, not really." You know, I might be a little bit more like Amanda. I don't know. Well, you'll have to see. but I do think there are a couple of characters there, you know, in fact, some of them are probably seen as secondary for sure, where they really are modeled after some of my favorite people I've ever known, you know. And like you said, there is a little bit of like, hey, it's all gonna work out, optimism baked into the book by a few of them. And those people really rub you the wrong way when you're the one who's dealing with the major tragedy and
In crisis. Yes,
right,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So I think I just part of what makes it hard to talk about this book in a way that I want to talk about it with people, especially if they haven't read it yet, is the fact that there is a lot. There is a lot going on. And I will just say this, and it's me name dropping, and I'm fine with that because I see it happening all over the place. But honestly, Johnny Compton, after he had read it, I saw him down at some other fest in San Antonio.
After he read and blurbed it.
He blurbed it, yep. And he said, "You know what I love about your book, besides what I've already said?" He's like, "There's so much going on, and it all is relevant, and it's all tying together." And of course, then he's like, "It reminds me of me," you know. And I was like, "Yeah, sure," and I agree because I love his books for that reason. You know, there's there's storylines within the storyline, and there's a lot to unpack. And I think even just Nicole being an addict is something that you could spend an hour on for sure. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Nicole is the adoptive mother who she and her husband take care of Ethan after his birth parents are dead. So we are almost out of time, but I wanted to touch on, because we were talking about how there's so much going on in this book, there's so much complexity, but it is also such a commercial, compelling, propulsive read. Like it moves and there's a lot of twists and turns, and I kind of categorize it as a horror slash psychological thriller. Would you kind of agree?
Yes, I mean, I think that's, you know, I've started to insert the word paranormal uh,
Yeah.
there when it feels appropriate because it is a ghost. Like somebody called it a ghost story on NetGalley, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess it is a
It
ghost
is.
story,
Yeah.
right?
And
Yeah,
oh, we should also mention that the novel touches on the idea of uh what's the word when you take over someone's body?
possession.
Possession. Thank
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I said at one point I was joking around. I said I want to write a possession novel for the whole family. You
you.
know, and that's important to me. I think that's an important thing to mention, really, is that I had many things in mind when I started to actually finesse the book and create the whole story. One of the things that was in my mind a lot was the film Poltergeist by Steven. Well,
Hmm.
it wasn't by produced by Steven Spielberg, probably directed by, but because that is a film that will scare everyone,
Yep.
and you care about everyone, but you can let you know, I saw it when I was 10, maybe slightly too early, but you could let a 13-year-old watch that film,
Yeah.
they're going to be scared, and there's a tension, and there is optimism baked in there, and you have this feeling that despite everything that's going wrong, you're clinging to this idea that it's going to work out. You don't quite know how, you
Yeah.
know. That's I just really wanted to provide something that anyone could read and would feel scared by, that you know, didn't go too deep into anything gory. I think that was
Oh,
maybe even one of the first questions you asked me is like, is it gory? And I'm like, no, it's not gory. It'll scare
yeah.
you. It's gonna scare you.
It'll scare you. You will have nightmares if you want them. If you're a horror reader who likes being scared. But it is definitely more on that psychological side of things. There's not a lot of blood and gore at all. But so just to wrap up, the horror genre is really skyrocketing lately in popularity. Um, this is one of the fastest growing categories in book publishing right now, especially amongst women readers. But really, truly, everyone is kind of finding their way to horror lately. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about why that might be, or what's so appealing about horror narratives at this point in time.
I think that as the world around us presents an infinite number of new challenges that we find complex and scary, and I'm not just talking about political things. I think even the prospect of what AI is going to do or not do for us, There's a lot to think about, and honestly, worry, that turns into worry and concern.
Mhm.
And to run away to a horror story for a little bit that's a complete piece of fiction, even if it is steeped in the realities of things that are going on, which I love that. I love that when a book takes that angle.
Me too.
I think people are just looking to be pushed to a place where they
Mhm.
can feel and let go of some of the horror they're carrying around, some of the internal strife that they're walking with. I have always loved horror, so I don't know. Maybe it's just because I needed to escape in that way from way earlier on than some people are now. And I honestly think too, I mean, I've been saying this, as you know, I have my own radio show, and I've been saying it for a long time. There are a lot of really amazing, diverse voices in the horror genre. You have everybody, right? Everyone is coming to the table, and I think horror publishers have allowed that to happen in a bigger way, maybe.
Yeah,
And there's fresh voices, and the stories are just very inventive. They're just so good. They're
it's so
so
true. We're in like a horror heyday right now. It's a really good place to be. And I think yeah, having a place for us as readers living in the world to put those feelings that we might be feeling and just channel it into some very cathartic narrative. No matter how dark or messed up, the story might be, it can feel very cathartic to read. So What the Dead Can Do is definitely one of those books. I am obsessed with it. I love it with my whole heart. Librarians, everyone watching, thank you for taking the time to spend 15 minutes with me and Peter. Please check out What the Dead Can Do by Peter Roche. It is a not to be missed novel. Congrats, Peter.
Thank you, Jess. Bye, everyone. Appreciate it.